For better or worse, the Postal Service will replace its old local delivery trucks with a combination of gasoline and electric ones. It's a huge acquisition, nearly $10 billion. The program includes the acquisition of electric chargers, which require testing and evaluation. The USPS Office of Inspector General took a look, and here with what it found, Deputy Assistant IG Amanda Stafford. Ms. Stafford, good to have you with us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And there's a lot of pieces to this acquisition. Tell us what you were focusing on specifically here.
As you mentioned, about 66,000 of the vehicles that will be acquired will be battery electric. So in preparation for their arrival, the Postal Service first focused on charging station acquisition and infrastructure readiness. Successful charging station procurement, testing, and installation will ensure that the new vehicles can be charged and ready to use when they arrive. Specifically, we looked at the contracts related to the charging stations. We wanted to verify that the charging stations met the requirements laid out in the contractor's statement of work. And our objective was really, one, to determine whether the Postal Service was effectively testing and monitoring the performance of the charging stations, and two, to evaluate whether they were providing effective oversight over that storage of them as well.
All right. And the contractor, is it the manufacturer of the vehicles, or is it a manufacturer of charging stations, or is it some kind of an integrator that makes sure that one is compatible with the other? Because that's a question.
Right. The charging station manufacturers are different than the vehicle manufacturers. The Postal Service has 3 charging station suppliers providing different types of chargers, and the vehicles are produced by a different combination of providers, so they're not the same. So overall, we really concluded that it was prudent for the Postal Service to elect to test and monitor these commercially available charging stations. They were going to be deploying up to 41,000 of them throughout the delivery network. And they used first article testing to really verify that they met the requirements laid out in the contract statements of work. While traditionally you don't need to do a first article test, it's not required for something that's already commercially available. But the Postal Service really wanted to go above and beyond to look at the interoperability and identify any performance issues.
You probably didn't include this, but maybe you did. Are they running into a possible crazy complexity cost question if they have 3 different types of chargers, and I'm presuming they have different plug styles? And having rented an electric car once, I'll never do it again because one plug doesn't go into that car and that car doesn't fit that plug. And could they have chaos when they have 10 trucks that need charging, but there's only 6 of the compatible plugs available or something?
And like you did, that really wasn't in the scope of this particular audit, but obviously looking at all of the different types and looking at sort of monitoring their performance in the future would be something that would be great oversight for us to continue to keep tabs on.
And when you mentioned first article testing, that's getting a sample and setting it up and seeing what it does?
Exactly. They had a number, each of the manufacturers provided their different units, and the Postal Service tested each. We actually went to one of the sites and were there for the testing.
Right. Okay. And what are some of the chief parameters that they're making sure that these things will do? Because it's probably different from a home installation where maybe things are more controlled.
Right. They were looking at sort of workmanship issues, software issues, hardware issues. Really, we found that any of the issues that were found during the testing were all corrected, and they were fully approved by the end of June. But yes, they're looking at different sort of, how does the charger physically work? Is it physically working, as well as sort of the software issues themselves?
We're speaking with Amanda Stafford. She's Deputy Assistant Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service. And you found on that aspect of the acquisition they were pretty good in doing that first article testing to make sure the darn things would work and I presume hold up under rugged multiple person use, which is always a problem for any kind of machinery. But there's some things they need to work on, you found also.
Yep. So they did a lot of things that went really well. There were some areas for improvement. We found that the Postal Service really needed to look at the management controls over the storage of the charging stations that were at the material distribution center. Specifically, facilities management did not employ necessary physical safety measures to protect and deter theft of Postal Service assets. This is location, there were thefts in the location where they were being stored. And we found that despite previous thefts, that some of the crucial remediation measures that were identified previously had not yet been implemented. So there was, again, a break-in that happened again in May where that location was, and it resulted in additional losses to the Postal Service, including the theft of some of the charging station heads, and as well as some IT equipment.
Interesting. So these things are not like a parking meter where it's a steel unit that's in concrete. I mean, nobody steals parking meters, and they're out there all by themselves. These are a little bit more portable than that type of equipment.
I would say that this was a central distribution center. So this is where they were going to be centrally storing those items to then disperse and then permanently install. So I think, it was a prudent decision to have them placed in a location and have them available ahead of time. But at the same time, there was some security, safety measures.
I imagine they're in high demand because that's an expensive component relative to the vehicle, right? I mean, again, I don't know what they cost.
I wouldn't say they're extremely expensive, and I don't want to opine as to sort of the cause of the theft. I think that there have been previous issues, and it may be completely unrelated. But that being said, we just wanted to make sure that that facility was secure.
But they don't give you the charger with the car, so to speak. That's a separate acquisition.
They're separate acquisitions, correct.
All right. So what were your recommendations then here?
So we just have one recommendation, really, because of the insufficient safeguards. We recommended that the Postal Service take urgent action to finalize and implement the physical security plan for the assets stored at that materials distribution center.
And by the way, is there one charger per vehicle? Is that part of the acquisition? Or would there be I don't know, I'm making this up, 6 chargers for a given postal installation? And if there's 15 trucks there, they would just be rotated through the chargers, or maybe all the trucks aren't there all at once anyway.
Yes, you don't necessarily need a 1-to-1 ratio. You don't need one charger per vehicle, no.
And how big are these chargers that someone could carry one off? It's bigger than a computer charger, which you can fit in your pocket.
They have various models, so I can't exactly say, but yes, you would not just carry one off into your pocket for sure. And like I said, they will be taking those chargers and installing them, permanently, physically into the different locations where they'll have the electric vehicles located.
So eventually they get screwed to the wall in some way or mounted in a way that you can't walk off with them.
And that was part of the reason why they had different types of manufacturers and different types of charging stations so that they could support, the buildings already exist. So they have to make sure that the charging infrastructure fits within the confines of those buildings that they have.
And do we know yet where the Postal Service plans to deploy them? I mean, there are some very large installations that are almost 24-hour operations, like a small city mail center, whereas some rural places or tiny post offices are closed and alone for a lot of the time during the day and would be more, I would say, subject to break-in or theft.
I think the Postal Service definitely, as part of their electrification strategy, really thought through what locations made sense from a distance standpoint, all the different variables. That was part of their environmental supplemental that they created. So it was very much thought through, but they're still in the process of rolling it out. And I'm sure it's a dynamic process that could change over time as they assess needs and where they need to have them. It could vary and change.
And will you be looking at the other parts of the acquisition, the vehicles themselves, at some point?
That's right for future work, for sure.
Amanda Stafford is Deputy Assistant Inspector General of the U.S. Postal Service. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And we'll post this interview along with a link to her report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Deliver the Federal Drive to yourself. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.